there are rumors that Deshaun Watson is going to San Francisco. Mike Silver basically tweeted out that, they're trying to make a move for him, that he expects Watson to be traded, and that one of the big destinations that it could potentially be is San Francisco. So, Jake, you can get into this first. What do you think, man? Do you think there's truth to these rumors?
100% there's truth. I think a lot of it stems from Jimmy Garoppolo. If the 49ers were truly committed to Jimmy Garoppolo, absolutely 1,000,000% by now, the contract would have been restructured. I mean, look, D Ford's got a restructure. They've, brought in multiple guys on backloaded deals. Like they've been in obvious contact with players, contacting them about restructures and contracts 24/7. Garoppolo's contract would have been restructured by now. So this makes me think a couple things. Garoppolo's on the way out, and a rookie quarterback or Deshaun Watson is on the way in. Those are, for me at least, the only two options. Do I think that Garoppolo could return? Of course, there's always an opportunity for that, but it seems more likely than not that Garoppolo probably won't be the game one starter next season.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost inevitable at this time that that Garoppolo will be dealt at some point. They've been calling and checking on almost every quarterback that's been available. They called about Matthew Stafford, they called about Sam Darnold, they called about Teddy Bridgewater. Whether the reports come out that they didn't or not, obviously their name was involved, so they did call and check to see what was going on. They were in on Dalton. They're rumored to be in on Trubisky. Like they're looking at ways to get someone else in the building. And I don't think it's just for a backup. I think it's them trying to, because they're not committed, like you said. If they were committed, they would have restructured and they would have put an end to it. To say, hey, yeah, we're restructuring the contract. We gained some money. He has more guaranteed money, whatever that is. All that way got shut down. And then they said, they expect him to be the quarterback, back in December or whenever they said that. Like, who says expect? You either say he is or he isn't. So, like, they've been non-committal the entire time. I mean, we've all known this. There's nothing new about that. But yeah, I think there is some truth to it. I think, and then when the rumors are that he wants, one of two places, and those two places are Denver and San Francisco, the Niners have a real shot. Like, because my fear of them not getting Watson would be that they would get outbidded by a team that was willing to give more. If there was 4 or 5 teams that were in on it, I feel like the Niners would have got outbid, and then they wouldn't have got his services. But it's only 2 teams. And if I'm Houston, I'm trying to send him out of the division, out of the conference, because Denver's still in the conference. Like, if we send him in conference, if you do end up getting your team back into contention, you have to deal with a Deshaun Watson-led team to get, through a wild card round or a divisional round. You're trying to get your way to a Super Bowl. You'd rather him not be in your way when you're trying to, get to the title game. So sending him out of the conference is a way of doing that, just making sure he's not going to, crush your dreams, while you're on your playoff run or whatever. So yeah, I mean, San Francisco makes sense. And I think he's a big time Niner fan, isn't he? He's been a Niner supporter for a while. I think there's pictures of him in Niner jerseys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he wants San Francisco if he wants out. I think the Niners want to get a new quarterback. So you add, you put two and two together. It feels like something that should happen. It's just, will the Niners pull the trigger? Will they be willing to give up the 2 first round or the 3 first round picks? Maybe a Warner, maybe, a Bosa or something like that. Obviously that might not have even been brought up. It's just kind of a hypothetical, but are they willing to do what they haven't done before and trade multiple day 1 picks to try to get themselves a legit star quarterback and fix this quarterback situation? Because if you're going to do it, this is the offseason to do it. Watson won't be available next year. You won't have Fields. You won't have, Mac Jones. You won't have Trey Lance available next year. This is the year to do it. If you want to get out of this Garoppolo contract, you want to put an end to this, you want to just, bury it and put it away, toss the key. This is the year to do it. So just go ahead and get it done. But yeah, I think there's some real truth to these rumors. I think there's a good shot that Deshaun Watson could end up in San Francisco. It just depends on whether San Francisco wants to give up what it takes, and if Houston can stop being stupid and just free the man, because it's clear he doesn't want to be there.
It also does seem like Houston is kind of coming around to the idea that they're going to have to move on from him, because that's been the biggest thing out of a lot of the reports that have came out. Like, hey, they have to get him traded before the draft, or they're going to start enduring a lot of dead cap. Like some of the incentives and like bonuses for his deal start kicking in, and he has made it very clear that he does not want to be a part of that organization anymore. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, just because, okay, look, this team is now kind of opening up. All right, I think we're going to have to move on from him. That's where I think it's a big teller. Also, do you guys actually think it's only the Broncos and the Niners, or do you think that he would, if another team made an offer, do you think that he would waive his clause?
I think the Panthers are another team. The Panthers are another team I think he would be okay with going to.
Yeah, the two I was thinking of were the Panthers and the Jets.
I don't think Jets, because I think that organization is miserable. I know Salah's there and
it's LaFleur. It's got a LaFleur. Yeah.
LaFleur. There you go. So I know they're there. But I really think those guys are dead set on not bargaining their future away, and just picking a guy like Zach Wilson, who has plenty of potential. Carolina's interesting because I think he's from around the area. I think he's like Georgia native, so it's somewhat close to home a little bit. The Panthers, again, they're not really in a position to like mortgage their future away. Like, if you give up all these first rounders and second rounders and maybe a good player, like, maybe they give up like DJ Moore or something, like what's there for Watson then? Like,
I'll
what
say,
I mean?
They better not give up McCaffrey, because I own McCaffrey shares in every league, and I will be furious if he ends up part of the Houston Texans.
The Texans will waste him. Yeah, they will waste him.
I hope that's not the deal. And I also don't. I find it really hard to believe. Like you brought up Warner and Bosa, and like, of course, like, you got to bring up those guys because you are acquiring a superstar quarterback. I just find it tough to believe that any of these teams would like move on from a Fred Warner or a Nick Bosa or a Christian McCaffrey. Like, those super like gauge their value in a trade for that. That's why I don't think it would happen.
And the leverage is down because Watson, like, he's not coming back. Like, it's like, just get me out of here. So it's like, as far as leverage, they might not be able to even get what they want because teams know Watson's not coming back to your franchise. So it's like, this is how much we're giving, and that's it. Like, so that even that, like, at that point, like Warner and Bosa, McCaffrey, players like that aren't involved. It's like, no, we know you can't keep them. So this is what you're going to get. Take it or leave it. So that can play a factor too.
The other thing too is I want to bring up, if you're someone who's a non-believer, like the 49ers are sticking with Garoppolo, you believe the media headlines, then why are we going after, more receivers that are maybe deep threat guys? Like, we've been lobbed into the hat of a guy like Will Fuller. Jimmy Garoppolo is not hitting Fuller in stride, 40 or 50 yards down the field. Why would you get a deep threat receiver like that? Like, of course, like, yeah, we've been mentioned in Higgins free agency, as well as Juju, who both those guys are probably more underneath guys, slot kind of guys. But like, still, man, like, you're not throwing your name out there with other kind of big time receivers if you don't have a big time quarterback throwing to them. That's just my opinion.
Well, yeah, and you look at like some of the, I think there's a point to that. Also, look at what New England's doing, and I know people are like, okay, they just re-signed Cam. A lot of Cam stuff isn't. It's more of, is he a starter? What is his role? That's really how his contract shapes out. At least that's how I believe it's been shaped out. But look at a team like them. They just add 2 tight ends. They add Kendrick Bourne. Interesting. I mean, obviously they're always going to be linked to Jimmy Garoppolo because he was part of their team. But besides the Patriots, what other team would maybe be linked to Jimmy?
Chicago.
Chicago? Okay.
Because that's Jimmy's home, and Chicago just got Andy Dalton. They're not committed to Andy Dalton. I think Garoppolo, like, it might not be like, super like much of a difference, but I think Garoppolo is probably better than Dalton at this point. So maybe Chicago gives Garoppolo a shot because they missed out because Wilson might not get traded this offseason. And I know Dalton was kind of a guy they brought in because they don't want to, they're not going to commit to Nick Foles. So it's kind of like, just having them duke it out for the starting quarterback position. So maybe they think about Garoppolo a little bit. But yeah, that's maybe the only other team I could think of is maybe Chicago. But other than that,
I think underrated one is New York. I mean, we talked about what if they don't want Zach Wilson at 2? What if they turn on the tape on this guy and they're like, you know what, man, number 2, like our offensive line isn't that great. We have a possibly generational tackle prospect that could kick into guard if he doesn't work out at tackle, and Penei Sewell sitting there for us. What if they want to grab Sewell at 2 and then trade a second or a third for Jimmy? Right? I think that's a name you definitely have to lob out there just because of the San Francisco ties for sure.
Yeah, that would definitely depend on what LaFleur thinks of Jimmy too.
Definitely, 100%.
And I wonder, and then when it comes to that, maybe they, coaches always think they're the genius, right? Like these coaches think they have all the answers, so maybe they think they can use Garoppolo in a way they can unlock him in a way that Shanahan was unable to. That's always a factor. Like I'm sure that's probably why the Patriots want Garoppolo back, if that rumor is true, because I think Bill knows Garoppolo, knows what he needs to do to get the best out of him, and maybe he's like, okay, he has these issues in San Francisco, but if he comes here, I can erase some of those flaws with some of the things that I do, here in our system. So, not everyone views Garoppolo as a bum, like fans on Twitter think that they do. I think some of these coaches think they can do something with Garoppolo. I think his interest could be, now it depends on the price because of his contract. Like he's making $26.4 million, and that's not something you just want to take if you're not sure. Especially giving up assets to try to get him. But I think if he was on the open market, I think he has some suitors. I think if it was like a different scenario for him, if we didn't have to trade for him, I think he would have more interest than he does right now.
Yeah, especially with the contract that he's on. I think him as a player without that contract, it looks a lot different too. And that's so many players too. And that's kind of part of getting paid big money. Like once you get paid big money, you have to either become a really good player, or if you're just like a really good money, then people are going to always criticize you, and that's always going to happen. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, people always like, I like him, but not for that much. Like that always comes up a lot. Like, he's a good player, but not for that much. Like that, the contract is big in that standpoint.
And look at it too, like money. Why does money? We always bring up money in how like overrated a player is, right? Like, for example, like Kirk Cousins, right? I think Kirk Cousins collectively is underrated because he doesn't get it done in big games, but for what he gives you, people shit on this guy like he's a bottom 5 quarterback in the NFL. That's just not true. But because he has this, magic dollar amount attached to him, people like to say he's overrated because the Vikings paid him. It's like, no, like the reality is you just have to pay quarterbacks. Like that's just what the reality is. Like, unfortunately, every so or even average quarterback is just gonna probably set like the QB record because that's just how it is. Like most quarterbacks that are decent command high dollar.
Yeah, because they're not everywhere. Because that's how free agency works. You overpay for everyone. Like I think Kyle said it himself. Like in free agency, there's so many bidders that you have to overpay to get certain guys' services. Like it's just kind of how it works. So when people get paid more, like how do you get paid that much? Well, because of the market. They really wanted the player, and they're willing to pay what they had to pay to get them. So sometimes at least overpaying. But yeah, these players, just the tag on them, the price tag on them, it really determines what people think of them. Because like Kirk is really good, but he's not like $35 million good, but he's really good. So but because he's making $35 million, all guaranteed, people are like, yeah, Kirk is a bum. I think with Garoppolo too, he's making 26.4. He's not a bum, but making 26 million, it's like, yeah, he's not worth that, So that too, it factors in when it comes to like judging players. Like the price tag is a big determining factor of determining whether a player is worth it or not.
100%. And then moving a little bit back to the just like about the Deshaun Watson trade, you brought up Fred Warner, Nick Bosa potentially, but if there was some type of deal, and I remember hearing this a while back, that what the Texans wanted, I think it was 3 first and 2 defensive starters or 2 starting level players. What kind of guys do you think would work in a deal like that for the 49ers? Because I think there's three guys.
I think Greenlaw's one. I think I know people. I mean, I think Kinlaw could be one. Now that wouldn't probably be questionable because you just traded DeForest Buckner to get him, but I think Kinlaw could be one. Who else? I wonder if a guy like Tavarius Moore maybe could be another. I'm not sure.
I've thought about Tavarius Moore, yeah.
Yeah, because he's got some promise. I mean, he still has some learning to do. He has some busting coverage at times, but he's talented. So I think that he's another guy that maybe you could put in that deal and maybe it works.
Yeah, it depends what they think of him too. I think that kind of depends on specifically the Texans organization.
I think Greenlaw's definitely one. I think Kinlaw would be another one.
I think, and this might be controversial, I think Debo for sure is a guy that
I can
the
see Debo.
49ers will look at. I don't know how much interest the Texans would have just, scheme-wise. A lot of the reason why Debo is so good is because Kyle Shanahan uses him exactly how he's supposed to be used. But I think the reality, unfortunately, for the 49ers is they're getting to a point where they're too good, and you just can't keep everybody. So there are going to be some form of casualties coming up here in the future, whether that is a guy like a McGlinchey or Debo, these guys with expiring contracts pretty soon. I think Debo for sure is one, just because I think receiver is a relatively replaceable position. And that's also part of the reason I think the 49ers are looking into receiver. It's because, okay, if we do lose a guy like Debo, whether that be via injury this season or maybe trade, whatever, you have to have a backup plan. You can't just run Kittle and Ayuk out there and expect it to work, because all it takes is, hey, we're going to double Ayuk or we're going to double Kittle, and now all of a sudden, all game long, they know exactly who you're going to be throwing to. And that's not a very good, strategy from just a game perspective going into every single week, where the defense basically can ISO into one guy.
Debo, to make sense, they'd be looking at signing some of these wide receivers. I know the big guy that they were rumored to was Juju, but there's also, I think, Rashard Higgins, Will Fuller, Taylor Gabriel, who's kind of would be a different role than what Debo would play, obviously, more of a slot guy, but they've been linked to a lot of receivers, so that makes sense. I think the other two guys potentially could be Eric Armstead, though I do think it'd be a little bit odd for the Texans to get him. I do think that's a little bit strange, not really on their timeline. And I think maybe Mike McGlinchey as well, but I think that's probably it for those guys. I think that's probably those guys. But yeah, overall, just real quick, do you guys think there's a lot of truth to these rumors about Watson?
I think so. I mean, what's his name? John McClain. He's one of the Houston reporters. His stance in January was he has a better chance of being a head coach than Deshaun Watson has of being traded. And then today he's like, yeah, I think they haven't said they won't trade him since January, so he's probably going to get traded. So and he's a reporter in Houston, so I think he's pretty tapped in. So I think there's some real. I mean, and now with this whole lawsuit thing going on, it's like they're kind of just taking shots at him on his way out the door. It feels like that. There's no way that works. There's no way he goes back and that works. It's pretty much done. You have to trade him, and it doesn't make sense for him to hold on to him past the draft, because at that point you don't gain anything to use in this draft to try to because this roster isn't ready to compete. It has some holes in it, so why not try to trade him now and get some assets in, so you can start rebuilding this roster. I don't think it makes sense for him to keep him. So I mean, at this point, I would assume that the rumors are true.
Yeah, and just to add on top of that, I mean, I don't think it's a question of if they are true. I think it's, okay, where's he going? Because it's pretty evident, I think, that they don't have a choice. I think they're basically locked into trading him. They can, they can play dead all they want. It's not going to happen. People aren't biting on that. The media, the fans, front offices, they're eating their way right through that. They're faking, and they know that the Texans, they honestly hurt themselves because they backed themselves into a corner now, and they really lost a lot of leverage. I think the only way that the Texans have a little bit of leverage is in where he goes, because yes, Watson does have a full no trade clause. And I do think that he is prepared to waive it for the right teams. But I think it's going to come down to the Texans know a team like Carolina will probably mortgage their future away, as opposed to a team like San Francisco with a smart front office. And I think that they will try and attempt to trade him to a team like Carolina. And the way they might gain leverage is, okay, well, now that maybe you're refusing a trade out to Carolina, the price has suddenly gone down. We don't like the offer from a team like Denver or San Francisco, so we're just going to hold on to you even longer. Maybe, threaten to retain him. Maybe that's a way they gain leverage. I'm not sure. But I do think that he's on his way out for sure.
Yeah, I agree with both you guys. But that's going to do it for today's episode. I want to say thanks again, Kobe, for coming on. This was a great time. And it was also great having you back, Jake. It's been a minute. So
For sure,
anyone listening for the first time, like, subscribe. If you're listening on podcasts, rate and review. That helps a lot. But thanks again for coming on, Jake and Kobe, and I appreciate it a lot. So thanks everyone for listening as well, and we'll talk to you guys soon.